Good morning, members. It's the appointed time. We have all the members here. And we have invited the government officials to join us. So we welcome everyone joining us. We have with us Mr. Francis Ho, Deputy Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. Mr. Timothy Wong, Principal Assistant Secretary, also from the FSTB. Mr. Aaron Chen, Assistant Secretary from the FSTB. Mr. Raymond Chen, Executive Director from the HKMA. Mr. Trevor Keane from the HKMA. Also joining us, Ms. Kelly Chen, Chief Superintendent from the Hong Kong Police Force. From the DOJ, we have Ms. Celia Ho, Senior Government Counsel, and Mr. Jonas Wong, Government Counsel. Welcome, everyone. So we will first discuss the overall merits and policy matters of the bill. So I will first invite the administration to walk us through the bill. I draw members' attention to the fact that on the 16th of April, our legal advisor wrote to the administration, and that's CB bracket 1655/2025 bracket 03. That's our legal advisor's letter, and we have heard from the administration. The administration will take us through the reply in a moment. So we will start with Mr. Francis Ho, who will walk us through the proposal. Good morning, everyone. I will spend a few minutes to go through the slides about the bill. So the goal here is for authorized institutions or AIs to share account data in certain circumstances so that we do better in preventing and detecting crime. As members will be aware, online banking is gaining traction, and then after COVID, more and more people use e-payments across the world. Fraud and the associated money laundering have seen a surge globally. In 2021, the police received reports of suspected fraud of less than 20,000 cases. But then by 2024, that number jumped to close to 45,000 cases. Losses in 2024 amounted to $9.1 billion. The HKMA, the police force, and the banking industry launched various measures to combat fraud and the associated money laundering. Still, we think there's more we can do to protect people and to reduce their losses. Now, between AIs, there are information gaps. Simply put, Bank A sees something suspicious, illicit activities, Bank A act. But then the current mechanism comes with certain confidentiality obligations, contractual or otherwise, so the AIs cannot alert one another quickly. In June 2023, the HKPF, the HKMA, and the Hong Kong Association of Banks launched the Financial Intelligence Evaluation Sharing Tool Finest. That platform allows AIs to take part on a voluntary basis. On that platform, AIs can share information quickly. The problem with that platform is that it covers only corporate accounts. Now on finance, we have 10 AIs on board. Every month, we see 20 to 30 instances of data sharing on the platform. That shows banks are keen to use the platform is working. Still, that platform covers only corporate accounts. 90% of fraud and money laundering in accounts involved individual personal accounts, so that's where finest falls short. So our legislative proposal seeks to provide safe harbor provisions so that banks can share account data not just on corporate accounts but also on personal accounts on a voluntary basis. say Bank A wants information to help them detect or prevent suspected prohibited behavior. And there's definition for such terms in the ordinance, meaning we're talking about money laundering, terrorist financing, or funding or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. When such conduct is suspected and banks need information, banks can share information on accounts, and in such a case, those banks will be immune from civil action or criminal liability. But then, to qualify, banks will have to meet certain requirements, so they have to exercise reasonable care, they have to act in good faith, and also they have to meet confidentiality requirements. Banks also need adequate control systems in place. They have to keep records as well. And we have spelled out these requirements in the bill. We believe our proposed system or mechanism can plug a gap, and we're also in line with global practice. Take, for instance, the Financial Action Task Force has standards, and we're in line with those standards. In the UK, the US, and Singapore, similar legislation is in place. The requirements in those places are similar to what we propose here, meaning they have a safe harbor, and banks they also take part voluntarily. So there are two parts to our bill. One, banks can request information. If banks suspect money laundering, terrorist financing, or funding of weapons of mass destruction, those banks can ask another bank to provide information. So you have this request and response mechanism. The second part is that a bank can voluntarily disclose information, and that happens through Finest. So Bank A on Finest can talk to another bank or several other banks or all other banks on Finest. Bank A can let all those banks know. Now, when it comes to information sharing, that has to be related to suspected prohibited conduct. So the information covers information on the customer, entities related to this customer, the accounts, and the transactions. As I said, the information sharing can be on a one-to-one, one-to-many basis. One bank can share the information with all other banks on the platform, and this does not require prior customer consent. Still, all those requirements I've mentioned have to be met beforehand. We have consulted the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data. We have incorporated the PCPD's comments into the bill. When an AI fails to meet all the requirements, they will not have the protection of the safe harbor, and there will be civil action, criminal liability. The HKMA may also bar that AI from taking part on the platform, and there will be no more sharing for that AI. We will come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny in a moment, but I want to quickly go through some points. Now, we're inserting 13 provisions, 13 clauses to the banking ordinance. AAB, for example, when an AI can request information from other AIs, AAC, disclosing information, when information can be disclosed, say upon request, or a bank can disclose information voluntarily. And when an AI receives information, Bank A receives information, and then it thinks maybe other banks can find the information helpful. So this information can be retained. So AAE is about correcting information, and then you have other provisions on confidentiality or a safe harbor. AAH or AAI control measures, and also data retention, etc. Three other provisions are on circumstances about access to data, AAL and AAM. The monetary authority will be empowered to issue guidance. The MA will be able to designate a platform for the data sharing. The last slide, this is about the consultations. From January to March 2023, the HKMA consulted the public. The comments received were generally supportive of this proposal. And then in September 2024, the HKMA released the findings. Last October, we consulted the panel on financial affairs at Legislative. Members generally supported our proposal, and they would like to see the swift implementation of our proposal. As the chairman said, on the 16th, we received a letter from Legical's legal advisor setting out his observations. And this morning, and I do apologize for the short notice, that we only managed to put together a reply this morning, and when appropriate, we will go through our reply. And we're also happy to address any questions members may have. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Now, since we have every member here, so I want to check with members. It's about the consultation. So, members, do we want to invite the public and deputations to provide their comments, and what form of submission we're looking at? Ms. Carmen Khan? Chairman, from January to March 2024, there was a round of public consultation. The comments received were generally supportive. So I think written submissions from the public will be fine. So are we all good? Yes? So in that case, can we get our secretary to invite the public to provide written submissions? So we now come to the policy matters. I now open the floor for questions from members. Members may have multiple rounds of questions in mind. So to make it easier for everyone, let's do 7 minutes per member. We start with Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you, Chairman. I welcome this bill. As Mr. Francis Ho has said, we saw a surge in the number of scams. 2021, less than 20,000, and then last year, 44,480 cases, $9.1 billion in losses. 90% of the case accounts were personal accounts. Now, finance only covers corporate accounts, and that's not good enough. On different occasions, say at the panel on financial affairs, I have argued that I would like to see the early passage of a bill to put in place a system like this, and I'm glad to see this bill coming here. And we're not just covering a particular point. We're trying to facilitate information sharing between banks. For that, I'm grateful to the FSTB and the HKMA for their effort. I do have some concerns. On the 10th of April, the HKMA, the Hong Kong HKPF, and the HKAB have jointly announced new measures. For the police, wider usage of scam data from Scam Meter Plus. So I want to hear from the police how that will work. And for sharing of information between banks, we're now working on this enhanced version of Finest. There's a third measure, and that's about good practice on sharing of information over scams. And there's also a point about special reviews to help banks put in place effective measures. And then there's a fifth measure. It's about public education to alert the public to not lend or share their bank account. So can we get the administration to tell us more about the measures? The first measure has to do with the police force. Now, on the fifth measure, let's look at the mainland and also in Singapore. It's about asking people not to share their accounts. In the mainland and Singapore, they have dedicated legislation. The merit with the legislation is that That legislation states that when you share or sell your bank account and you don't have a reasonable excuse, there is a piece of dedicated legislation in place to address that. Having such legislation will help us address mule accounts with greater success. So I hope that we can move on to that step. Maybe this is beyond the scope of the FSTB, but I would like to see greater government attention to this point. Other places have their dedicated legislation. We have OSCO in Hong Kong. The law in the mainland and Singapore is more straightforward. There, you share or you lend your account, you break the law. Under OSCO, you have to prove you have actual knowledge or constructive knowledge that you know the account is for crimes, and then there are other factors that you have to prove. So on those 5 points, I would like to see what the government's views are.
Well, I need to declare, first of all, that I work for one of the banks in Hong Kong. Right, Ms. Carmen Khan, you need to declare your interest as well. Right, also in the banking sector. So much for Mr. Chan as well. So who will take this question? Mr. Chan? Thank you, Ms. Carmen Khan, for her questions, and I'm also grateful for her sustained support for our work and for letting us know her observations. Now, we announced 5 new measures on the 10th of April. One of these measures relate to AI information sharing mechanism, which we are looking at today. Other measures include, for example, more extensive use of scam meter data. I'd like to elaborate on this. About the scam meter database, there is an impression that the database only contains information relating to the bank account, but that is not true. It also contains the phone number and email addresses of the fraudsters. So having discussed with the police, we've decided to allow banks to access the scam meter database as well, so that banks will be able to check against the scam meters database and see whether the same phone numbers or email addresses used by fraudsters also appear in their clients' list. They may be using another handle. They may be using the accounts lent by the victim. But then the banks will become cautious. Now, if the fraudster then uses the account to make a deposit, for example, the banks will be alerted. So that's one of the measures relating to the police. The other measure relates to sharing of good practices. Now, we've been working with the police, and recently we've noticed cases involving consecutive transfers of monies from the victim to fraudsters. And the background of these cases usually involve romance scams or investment scams. So they make regular deposits into the fraudster's bank account. And having discussed with the police, we have developed different strategies. For example, if need be, the bank staff could invite the victims to receive an interview at a branch. And if need be, we can also enlist the help of the police and perhaps contact the family members of the victims. So these are good practices, and we have consolidated these cases for sharing with the banks in the form of a circular. And we'd like to encourage banks to adopt these good practices. So the 4th measure relates to the thematic reviews, which will come in the second half of this year. In terms of fraud prevention, I think that we do have the banking sector's support. Now, our thinking is to work as partners in preventing scams. We call it a review, but we do hope that through the thematic review, we'll be able to make recommendations to banks in order to improve their systems. Now, coming to another measure, this relates to some ongoing efforts That's publicity and education. Now, for family members of expatriates who work here and new arrivals, we step up publicity in collaboration with banks. We tell them not to sell their bank accounts, and also the laws in Hong Kong. And we're happy to announce that we have altogether invited 18 banks to participate in our work, and we've also set up some task forces. So clearly, that means additional resources to support our work. Ms. Carmen Can also just referred to legislative exercises in other jurisdictions to prevent the lending or selling of bank accounts. And like Mr. Ho said, in fact, fraud is not unique in Hong Kong, and on a regular basis, we note the latest strategies in other jurisdictions to combat fraud. And if need be, we'll also make reference to these efforts. I understand that Ms. Khan has also expressed her concern to the police. So perhaps in the near future, we will talk to the police again and see how we can have a joint effort from different government departments. Right. How about we let the next member speak first? And next, Dr. Tan Yue Hong. Thank you, Chairman. Well, in relation to the Banking Amendment Bill 2025, before the bill has been introduced in the Legislative Council, the administration has already made ample preparations, including consultation and consideration of data privacy matters, etc. Now, just now, the administration told us about the surge in the number of fraud cases, and against this backdrop, something must be done, especially to plug the loophole of the finance not being able to enable sharing of information relating to personal accounts. In order to enhance our enforcement efforts against crimes such as money laundering, we need to take forward this legislative exercise. Now, I have a number of suggestions. The first one is this. This is a voluntary mechanism. What is the incentive to encourage participation on a voluntary basis? Is it necessary to provide an incentive? For example, incentive in the form of tax concession for participating institutions to join this mechanism. So the first point is about incentive. Second point. Now, for AIs of a smaller scale, inevitably, this will entail heavier workload on them. So will the government provide technical support, at least, to them? Are there projects to provide some form of support or assistance in order to encourage smaller AIs to join the mechanism as well? Third point, well, we can't rule out abuse. Is that right? There could be abuse of the information sharing system. And the paper is silent on how this kind of abuse should be tackled. Can we require the AIs to go through an internal assessment process before sharing information with other AIs in order to prevent abuse? The internal assessment could help weed out unnecessary errors. The other suggestion is that a public hotline should be set up. There should be an avenue of complaint available to the public. Is another anti-abuse measure. 3 points. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Tan, for supporting our bill. Dr. Tan has made very useful observations. Now, when we discuss with the banks, there is general support for this voluntary mechanism. Dr. Tan asked about incentives. In fact, under Finest, 10 banks have signed up for the mechanism on a voluntary basis. These 10 banks are large banks and small to medium-sized banks. So this is the level of participation we have at the moment. And by participating in this mechanism, banks can give assurance to their clients as well. So there are benefits. And I believe with the passage of the bill, the Hong Kong MA will continue to liaise with banks to explain to them the benefits of joining our mechanism. And we will also do our best to help them drive down compliance costs. The member also talked about abuse, and this is something really close to our heart. In fact, in the bill, we have specified that this mechanism only applies to prohibited or sharing of information relating to prohibited conduct. Now, if banks share information in relation to other activities of the client, such as the financial situation of individual clients, then the banks in question will not enjoy the safe harbor protection. I will now give the floor to the Hong Kong MA to explain incentives to encourage participation of small to medium-sized AIs. Right, thank you, Dr. Tan, for the question. On this voluntary mechanism, I'd just like to add to what Mr. Ho said. If we take a look at the laws in other countries, they also set up voluntary mechanisms. And their objective is to regulate banks of sizable scale. So in terms of smaller AIs, it's not really the major target of the bill. So indeed, our scope covers banks of sizable scale, or at least medium-sized banks. Now, inevitably, the bill will bring an increase in compliance costs, but I urge everybody to understand that the mechanism will help banks detect suspicious transactions. Now, in fact, the banks have already put in place their own systems in detecting suspicious transactions. We don't envisage a major jump in compliance costs, but we will continue to monitor the situation closely. We'll definitely provide technical support in terms of interfacing of systems, etc. I believe the police will likewise provide assistance if need be. As for anti-abuse, we believe that banks follow stringently our guidelines in their operations. Now, there are also other measures to help us tackle unscrupulous practices. For example, in an extreme situation, we go after the responsible officer. We checked whether it's a fit and proper person, and we also consider the business of the institution and whether restrictions should be imposed. And in an extreme situation, for example, like Mr. Ho said in his opening remarks, we can stop an AI from joining the information sharing mechanism. About this public complaint hotline, here's how it goes. At present, the AI to AI information sharing mechanism covers corporate accounts. So corporate account holders can make inquiries under this mechanism. They can approach the Hong Kong MA, and I believe that banks also have their respective hotlines. The police, likewise, will also take inquiries and complaints.
Mr. Robert Lee. Thank you, Chairman. I support the Banking Amendment Bill 2025. Late last year, we had a discussion of this topic at the panel on financial affairs. We had a detailed discussion, and members generally supported the bill as well. Now, we're talking about a voluntary system. There will be a secure platform for AIs to share information on corporate and personal accounts. That's to prevent further fraud, and that's to protect the public. All that is important, and we're taking a positive step. Now, I have some questions. Different kinds of information will be shared. Just then, Dr. Tan asked about potential abuse, so I want to approach this differently. What mechanism would there be to make sure that the regulator will not use the information they get access to for purposes beyond preventing and detecting crime? Of course, it's good to share information to prevent and detect crime. But how do we make sure that the information shared will not lead to the regulator taking enforcement actions just because they spot from the information that the banks are not doing a perfect job? Now, I want to turn to another point, and that's non-banking financial institutions. And for example, securities brokers. Gold prices are surging. And now investors are after gold. So for non-banking financial institutions, and also you have to consider licensed operators of virtual assets. Of course, we should do what we can to protect the public, but we want to avoid unduly harsh or stringent rules. Has this been given thought? Now, for cross-boundary fraud to happen or to tackle this kind of fraud, you need some kind of collaboration. Our work here simply involves banks in Hong Kong, but scammers may be operating out of town. So do we have any regional international collaboration? Now I want to turn to the secure platform to be designated by the HAMA. So will the HAMA be running that platform? Meaning, will the HAMA be fully in charge of the platform? Will the running of that platform be outsourced? Will the HAMA be fully in control? Will banks also be partly responsible for running the platform? So, Mr. Francis Ho. Now, in a moment, the HAMA can comment on the point about whether there will be some nitpicking just because the regulator comes across information about the bank's work. And then there was a question about collaboration with out-of-town organizations. Now, first, I will address a couple of points. Now, it's a voluntary platform. And for now, we're only looking at banks. For over 80% of suspicious transactions, they happened through banks. That's why we want to start with banks. And we're not starting from scratch. We already have finance in place. That's for sharing information on corporate accounts between banks. We're simply going one step further. We will be covering personal accounts so that banks can share information on those accounts. As for other options, we keep an open mind. The member mentioned other fields such as virtual assets. It's a rapidly growing space, and then there are VATPs, virtual asset trading platforms. If we see such a need, we can consider whether there's room for incorporating those operators in this information sharing platform. As the member will be aware, our AMLO already covers VATPs. The SFC also has their own regulations against money laundering. Now, on information that's shared, how the HAMA will approach the information. Now, over to my colleague from the HAMA, Mr. Raymond Chen. I thank Mr. Robert Lee for his questions and for his support. Now, this secure platform that we will designate, we know we have financed. It's currently run by the police, and we're all comfortable with that platform. Another platform we can consider is the platform run by the settlement banks. It's the platform run by banks for settlement purposes. But we haven't decided on anything yet. For that platform, it's 50% owned by the HAMA, and the remaining half is owned by HCAP, HKAB. So we do have control over that platform. Now, on whether we will use outsourced platforms, I think that would be unlikely. Without sufficient control, it will be hard for us to keep control of things. Now, on cross-boundary collaboration, the platform we have in mind is for information sharing between banks in Hong Kong, and that will cover personal accounts. Now, when someone outside Hong Kong opens a bank account in Hong Kong, that bank data will also be covered. Now, some scammers deceive people in Hong Kong into sending money to outside Hong Kong. Now, when out-of-town remittances are involved, Hong Kong banks approach such requests with caution. Between correspondent banks, they have mechanisms for asking questions. That mechanism is mostly for money laundering and for dealing with sanctions. On whether that can be used to combat fraud, that may not be enough. We can use that, but that tool may not meet all our needs. Cross-boundary fraud is a problem, not just for Hong Kong. So for that, we will have to explore with other regulators out of town ways to address different problems. Our local banks approach remittances to outside bank accounts with great caution. In quite a number of cases, our banks spotted fraud, and those banks refused to proceed with the transactions. Next, Mr. Chen Hockfeng. I have some questions, and some questions are similar to those already asked. So this future platform will be voluntary. It's up to banks to decide. On finance, we have like 10 banks. Of course, we want more banks to sign up. Can we have a timetable such that all banks will be required to be part of the platform? If not, why not mandate participation? People want to be protected. If banks do not take part in the platform, then there's nothing the average person can do. So doesn't that mean less protection for the public? And for banks that are part of the platform, how do banks tell the public? Do banks have to tell their own customers no beforehand? Do bank customers get to choose which kinds of information they allow banks to share? Will people get to choose? Now, my next question has to do with technology. I know that AI-based solutions are used to spot suspicious accounts or activities. Are there roadblocks to the use of AI from our legislation? So, three questions for Mr. Francis Ho. Thank you. The first question about the voluntary system. We consulted the banking industry. We got strong views that we should first start with a voluntary system. Banks felt a voluntary system would be more in line with their needs. And that's also in line with the practice in other places. But the public may see a need for a mandatory system. And if banks agree that there is such a need and they agree to adopt a mandatory system, then we will be able to consider this option. So sorry for jumping in. I'm wondering if you have a timetable. Say 5 years, can we make it a mandatory system in 5 years instead of just waiting for a consensus to emerge in the market? What we can say is that we will keep an eye on how the system works. We will see how well it works. We will look at the number of cases involved. And then we will see if there's a need to convert the voluntary system into a mandatory one. The member also asked about how banks can let their customers know that the bank is part of the system. And then the last question was about technology. So my colleague from the HEMA can take those questions, Mr. Raymond Chen. On banks taking part in the system, we're thinking about putting a list online showing the list of banks that take part in the system so that the public will know. From January to March last year, we consulted the public. We got some views that actually questioned the need for such legislation. Some argued that we should go to the customers for consent and then we could share the data on a platform. But then criminals will not want to give you the consent. And it's also impracticable. By approaching each customer for consent, And when customers get to cherry pick which information to share, that will make the system unworkable. Time is of the essence when you are combating fraud. You want to intercept the fraud proceeds swiftly. And this is a distinction from previous money laundering. In the past, with money laundering, bank records helped the police catch the criminals. But then with fraud now, the criminals can transfer the money out right away. So that calls for a different approach. Giving customers the choice of the information to share will make it hard for banks. Now, on the use of technology to identify suspicious accounts, banks are already adopting the system. A commonly used system is a network analytics tool. That tool looks at the background of the customer and also looks at the past transaction patterns of each account. They will see if those activities have anything to do with suspicious accounts. Greater use of data from scan meter will help us see that a certain account number may be associated with a phone number associated with a fraudster. And then the network analytics tool will help us see that it's a suspicious account, and then we will look for other accounts that had transactions with this account. That will help us spot the mule accounts faster. Banks use the technology, and we don't see major privacy concerns at this point. For the future, we're thinking about whether we can use network analytics between banks to give banks alerts. And for that, we will have to meet the privacy requirements. And when we do go forward with such work, we will remain in touch with the Privacy Commissioner. We will also get legal advice to make sure that we meet the statutory requirements.
All right, second round, Ms. Carmen Khan again. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I thank the Hong Kong MA for explaining to us the 5 new measures. They elucidated very clearly for the benefit of LegCo members as well as the public that measures are in place to sustain the government's efforts in combating fraud. They will also have regard to the practices in other jurisdictions. According to the paper, 10 banks have signed up for finance, covering basically 75% of the corporate accounts. Now, you can opt for a written reply later, but if possible, do give me a list of the 10 participating banks. And I'd like to see if the information is available, such as, for example, the percentage of personal accounts covered, as well as the estimates, or perhaps this is premature. Perhaps you can give us this information when you apply for, when you report your progress to the relevant panel later. So my next question is about the KPIs and also the status of the 10 participating banks. The second point is this. As I understand, for the designated platform, according to the bill, the Hong Kong MA as the monetary authority will first specify the designated platform, and I understand that the HKICL, the Hong Kong Interbank Clearing Limited, will also be engaged in specifying another secure platform. Well, as I understand, before these platforms are designated, we will continue to use the finest platform set up by the police, and according to paragraph 17, the existing system will be expanded and the resource requirements will be absorbed by the police. Now, this system is of utmost importance, and I believe that this is also close to the heart of members. We need to ensure the security of the system. So be it Hong Kong ICL or the police, we need to make sure that the safety requirements are met. And in relation to 5C in the paper, the AIs must put in place adequate systems and controls, and that relates not only to the system but also the management and the staff. So I'd like to know whether these will be covered in the thematic reviews to be conducted by the Hong Kong MA in the second half of the year, so that we are assured that adequate systems and controls are put in place, and these will also entail the management of AIs and their staff in the operations. My third point is this. Can you tell us, from your experience of the finance platform, whether there are disputes? Now, I think that the legal advisor will be raising this point when we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. The standards and protocols in place, can you tell us whether any disputes have risen under the finance system? Because we are required to submit a suspicious transaction report, and that is the STR. But this is a mechanism that focuses on law enforcement agencies. Now, can you tell us very briefly, for the benefit of members and the members of the public, how suspicious transactions are spotted under finance and how you make sure that the transition will be smooth? Right, very briefly about the 10 participating institutions under finance. We have 5 systematically important local authorized institutions, including HSBC, Bank of China, Standard Chartered, Hang Seng, and also ICBC. And we also have 5 other banks, Banks of East Asia, CBC, Tai Seng, DBS, and also another online virtual bank called ZA Bank. Now, about the system upgrade of finance, I will give the floor to the police. Turning to the next point, as I understand, for adequate systems and controls satisfactory to the Hong Kong MA, that means the Hong Kong MA will issue guidelines. The Hong Kong MA will supplement this point later. As I understand, Ms. Khan also asked about the coverage of personal accounts in percentage terms. Should these 10 banks continue to join the system? Can you give us this information, or perhaps give us the information later? About the other point, disputes under finance, I'll give the floor to the police. Ms. Chang. About security of the finance platform, I will first address this point since this is an area of concern. Since the establishment of the finance platform, we've been following very strictly the guidelines and requirements of the Digital Policy Office and the Security Bureau, including risk assessment, incident reporting, handling, and security of cloud services. We also ensure the use of encrypted data transmission to ensure the integrity and security of the system. We also have a recovery center. Should there be problem with the finance system, the recovery center will start its recovery process. Now, we have a logging system. Only authorized officers can log it onto the system with a one-time password, and everything is logged. Only users authorized, such as the Hong Kong MA, participating banks, the police, can have access to the system. We also have measures to ensure security of data stored in the servers. So as far as the whole system is concerned, we have measures to ensure security. Now, after the bill has been passed, finance will be upgraded, and the upgrade will be based on the existing system. Now, we'll take a phased approach in upgrading the system. Our vision is to upgrade the system and dovetail the timetable with the rollout of the bill. Right, about disputes under Finest and the designated platform. The ICL has this ICL net, as Ms. Khan must know. This is a very secured email system with a high level of encryption. It's very professional. This is a system widely adopted by banks. So in the scenario of information sharing on a bilateral basis, that is, one bank requests information from another bank, then is quite straightforward, and we're considering whether this bilateral information sharing can be done on the ICL platform. As for the police's Finest platform, after system upgrade, we'll consider whether this can also capture the bilateral information sharing as well. If need be, we don't need to use, if possible, we don't need to use ICL's email system, but we are currently reviewing the situation. As for the adequate systems and controls, in the thematic review to be conducted in the second half of this year, we will consider these matters. In fact, we are actively preparing for the launch. One of our tasks is to request banks to review their existing internal systems or internal control systems to see if they're aligned with the Hong Kong MA's requirements. So the internal audit departments of banks will carry out the internal reviews, and they will submit a report to us afterwards. So the thematic review in the second half of this year may not include this particular review. Now, on the issue of disputes, indeed, we received a complaint from a client at one point. This client is of the view that the information pertaining to his bank account has been captured by the Finest platform, and we've actually considered this complaint. It is not substantiated in the end. I'm afraid we cannot disclose the details of this complaint. About suspicious transactions, as explained by Mr. Ho, if there is a suspicion that this client is a victim of fraud, then you should ask the counterparty bank, and that is the receiving bank. You should ask for certain information, for example, whether it's a shell company opening a new account and other relevant information, so as to help banks conduct an assessment on how this case should be handled to help the victim. Now, if this receiving bank has received a lot of inquiries in relation to this account being possibly a new account, then this bank may have received a lot of inquiries, and that means that this bank can then prepare a suspicious transaction report. The next step, however, is to make use of Finest to inform other banks as quickly as possible. This is much quicker than the previous practice where there is an information gap, because previously the report must be made before the police then informs other banks. So let's say if there is a client who's about to transfer money to this mule account, then other banks will be alerted much more quickly.
Ms. Khan, you may have to hold off your question because Mr. Robert Lee also has his questions. Ms. Khan, you can wait for the next round. Mr. Lee, I want to declare an interest. I'm in the financial services, not with an AI. Now, there's a question. I don't think that question was answered, and that is, of course, AIs have to follow all laws, regulations, and guidelines. Now, when banks share data, how can we reassure the industry that the information shared will not be something that the regulator will use to go after the banks for not doing their job? How do we make sure that regulators won't go into the information shared for evidence that banks are not fully complying with certain rules? Of course, we want more AIs to be on the platform. Because after all, you have to be mindful that you don't want banks to think that they are incurring extra risk by signing up for the platform. The HKMA will take the question. When we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, members will see that the provisions say that banks can request information or disclose information only in specified circumstances. AIs have to meet specified conditions, meaning the AI has to suspect that there is potential money laundering or fraud. And then to protect their customers, those banks can share information on the platform. And the bill sets out clearly that the information that is shared can only be used for preventing fraud and the associated money laundering. Banks have to talk to their customers to meet the requirements about combating money laundering. We are in touch with the industry. We're trying to give them more guidelines, more guidance. Banks have to combat money laundering, but they also have to minimize the impact on their customers. We want to strike a balance. And we have made clear to the banking industry that when it comes to fighting money laundering, we're not taking a zero tolerance approach. When banks go to their customers for information, we want banks to ask for information, only information that is needed as a way to minimize the impact on customers. We have such guidelines in place. Within the HKMA, we're also looking at our guidelines. We're updating the guidelines so that hopefully with more guidelines, banks can strike a balance between fighting money laundering and ensuring customers' experience. So from what I understand of Mr. Lee's question is that this mechanism will be something that banks can take part in voluntarily. Mr. Lee's concern is that a regulator will come along and say the bank should have declared all the information. Why did this bank not declare information? So Mr. Lee's concern is that when an audit comes along, this mechanism will be one more reason for a regulator to point the finger at a bank. So my concern is a bank is in business and they take part in this information sharing platform. Will that mean extra risk for them? Of course, all banks should operate in line with the law, but then when you have this information sharing information, when you have this platform, a bank may not be 100% compliant in the eyes of the regulator, and then the regulator may go after that bank based on the information that is shared on the platform. Of course, I believe the HMA will not do that, but I'm just wondering if we can reassure the industry so that we can allay concerns of overregulation. Mr. Raymond Chen. This is a balancing act, I believe. For this system to work, we will need banks that are committed to the work. With such an information sharing platform in place, then banks should be approaching other banks for information to protect their customers. And then when another bank comes to Bank A for information, and this bank is being uncooperative or is simply fobbing the bank off by giving them unhelpful information, then that's not good enough. Or a bank may be deliberately dilatory, meaning it's deliberately dragging its feet in sharing information. And that will also go against the purpose of setting up this information sharing platform. Now, on Finest, where we are already sharing details in corporate accounts, we can tell that banks are serious about sharing information among them to combat fraud. Last year, we shared a success story. A Chinese bank shared details with other banks, and they managed to block almost $800 million that could have gone to fraudsters. So going forward, we will continue to work with the police to keep an eye on the information sharing platform. We want to provide guidance to banks. We want to have in place a set of game rules where banks can agree on. We want everyone to be on the same page on when a bank can ask for information and when a bank should provide information. Now, we have already covered corporate accounts on Finest. So on that basis, we can tweak the rules a bit and then make the rules clear when we come to the personal account. That's why in the bill, there's a provision that empowers the monetary authority to issue guidelines. Mr. Robert Lee's concern is whether that will mean a lot of extra work for banks when it comes to compliance. We will strike a balance. We have been in touch with banks about this proposal. We team up with the banking industry to fight fraud. If we see areas where banks can do better, we let them know. Some banks also come to us telling us what they think they can do better. Some of the good practices were suggested by banks. Those banks share their good practices with us, so we go on to share those good practices with other banks. Now we come to the third round. Ms. Carmen Khan. I have some follow-up questions about how this future platform will interact with the STR mechanism. I do have a question about success stories. So we have just heard that there was a Chinese bank that stopped $800 million from going to fraudsters. So we should double down on the promotion of such success stories. Now, from what Mr. Raymond Chen has said, on Finest, when someone with Bank A wants to send money to Bank B, So Bank A asks for information when they see something suspicious. We will come to the threshold in a moment when we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. With information sharing on finest, banks can let each other know when one bank sees something fishy. And that will mean you will have a much easier time blocking the fraud proceeds. You will have greater success, and that's an incentive, because now you will be able to share information with many banks at a time. And for customers of banks on the platform, they will be more assured because they know they will benefit from this information sharing platform. So we should tell the public about the banks already on Finest. And also, telling people about the percentage of banks taking part in the system will also be helpful. We have just heard about internal audit. Some information has to be submitted to the HMA and to the Hong Kong Police Force. And then the ADCC also has to be involved. As the HMA said, this is a partnership. Bank A may be asking for information today, but then come tomorrow, Bank B may need information from Bank A. So we should be telling people more about how all this will work. The success of combating fraud will depend on what we will do going forward. And that's also a question from the legal advisor. What do we do before the commencement of the amendment bill? Now I come back to the point about suspicious transaction reports. So essentially, you do what you are supposed to do. When an STR is needed, the banks should proceed with the STR. What this bill will do is to provide safe harbor protection because information will be able to be shared on the platform. So for Mr. Raymond Chen, what do we do before the commencement? What will the preparation look like? So first of all, I thank the legal advisor for the questions. Now, on what we do before in the preparation phase, so we will upgrade our finance system. And we will consider whether to adopt the ICL-net. And also making clear the rules of the game by issuing guidelines for banks to be prepared, and we're working on that. Suspicious transactions. Ms. Khan is right. When banks think there is evidence showing an account is a mule account, even before filing a suspicious transaction report, that bank can let other banks know. So other banks will be alert and they can take steps to protect their own customers. Now, on the point about 75% and how on the percentage of bank accounts involved, and we're talking about all accounts, corporate accounts and personal accounts. So you're talking about 75% of all personal and corporate accounts, and we're only talking about 10 banks, and we're already covering 75%. So we have already covered 3/4. Now, depending on how ready banks are, we will be inviting more banks to get involved. But as I said earlier, we are targeting mostly retail banks, medium-sized or larger. Fraudsters rarely used the smaller banks or private banking services, but we will keep an eye on the situation. If need be, we may further amend the law to put in place a mandatory system instead.
Right. If there are no other questions from members on policy issues, then do allow me to ask in fact, 3 questions relating to the policy, and then we will start the class-by-class scrutiny. Mr. Chan just now mentioned that the Hong Kong ICL may be listed as one of the designated platforms. My question for the Hong Kong MA is this. In introducing a new platform, is there a particular mechanism on publicizing and explaining matters to banks or not? Because apart from the existing platform under the bill, there are also other platforms that can be designated. So that's my first question. Second question, we all mentioned the US, UK, Singapore, and in these jurisdictions, there are laws to allow sharing of information among AIs, also on a voluntary basis. My question is on your legislative amendment process. Is it the case that the provisions in Hong Kong are by and large similar to those in other jurisdictions? Third question, it is said that you've consulted the Privacy Commissioner. I understand at the meeting of the panel on financial affairs that the Privacy Commissioner considered this bill. Can you share with us his take on this bill? Is it that basically there aren't any strong views, and that if we go ahead with this bill as it stands, the Privacy Commissioner will be fully in agreement with you? Thank you, Chairman. According to the bill, the Hong Kong ICL and also Finest and other platforms may be designated. This is the power given to the Hong Kong MA. We don't see the need to designate other platforms at the moment. Now, Finance is already adopted by some banks at the moment. So if there are other platforms available, first thing first, the Hong Kong MA would need to consider whether this platform is secure for it to become a designated platform. And in this process, we will fully communicate with the banking sector about overseas experience. In drawing up this bill, we've made reference to the relevant provisions in the laws of other countries, such as Singapore and the UK. However, I must emphasize that we also have some scenarios unique to the local situation. So we're not just copying the provisions 100%. Perhaps the DOJ colleague can supplement when we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. As for the Privacy Commissioner, during the consultation in the first quarter of 2024, he has expressed support for the bill. Now, the Privacy Commissioner has expressed concerns about how this bill interacts with the banking ordinance, because we are departing from the existing approach of seeking consent from the client. So under the Data Protection Principle 3, in terms of using personal data, we may need to add to the third principle in order to meet the requirements. The other point is about confidentiality. Well, as mentioned, there may be scenarios in which a suspicious transaction report may have to be compiled, and the data owner may ask this question, that is, for information kept by this platform, it must be shared with the data owner. And that there is, in this bill, this request may be rejected. In fact, there are clear provisions. There are also some related provisions about data privacy, and we will elaborate on them when we come to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. Right, let's start the scrutiny. We will look at the Chinese version of the bill, and our legal advisor will meanwhile read the English rendition. I will invite members to now refer to the blue bill, and that is CB bracket 2567/2025. We will look at the long title first. I will invite the administration to take the floor, please. PAS, Mr. Wong. This is a bill to amend the banking ordinance to introduce a voluntary mechanism for authorized institutions to request or disclose information for the detection or prevention of crimes, to make safe harbor provisions for AIs disclosing information under the mechanism or using information so disclosed by other AIs, and to provide for other matters. Clause 1 of the bill sets out the short title and commencement. That is the Banking Amendment Ordinance 2025. The commencement date is as set out in Clause 1, Subclause 2. That is, the ordinance comes into operation on a date to be appointed by the Secretary for Financial Services in the Treasury. And then Clause 2, Banking Ordinance amended. It is amended as set out in Sections 3 and 4. Clause 3, long title amended. The long title, after brokers, add to make safe harbor provisions for AIs disclosing or using information for detecting or preventing crimes. Clause 4. We propose to add Part XIIAA, that is sharing of information among authorized institutions. And there are 13 new sections from 68AA to 68MM. They are divided into 4 parts. I now come to the new section 68AA in Part XIIAA. Right, any questions from members? After we finish this part, we can then check this marked up copy prepared by the Legislative Secretariat CB bracket 1655/2025 bracket 01. Again, to facilitate the scrutiny, when Mr. Wong cites the relevant clauses, please also cite the page number on the top right corner, 0001, etc. May I invite members to go to 0003? That's the new part XIIAA, and then interpretation section 68AA. It sets out a number of definitions of terms. There are a number of important ones, such as prohibited conduct. It means money laundering, terrorist financing as defined by Section 1 of Part 1 of Schedule 1 to Cap 615, or financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction as defined by the Weapons of Mass Destruction Control of Provision of Services Ordinance Cap 526. Designated platform. Under this interpretation clause, it means a platform designated by the monetary authority under section 68A AM bracket 1. We will go to that section in due course. There is also another definition for money laundering. A. It means dealing with any property that is the proceeds of Roman numeral 1, an indictable offense, or 2, any conduct that would constitute an indictable offense if it had occurred in Hong Kong. And B includes money laundering as defined by Section 1 of Part 1 of Schedule 1 to Cap 615. Cap 615 is the anti-money laundering ordinance. And then we have another definition for information. It includes data, text, images, videos, sound codes, and any combination of them. Division 1. Let's stop here. I see there's a question from Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you, Chair. My question is straightforward. You propose to add Part 12AA, right? So this will be added to Banking Ordinance Cap 155 for finance to capture personal accounts as well. I want to know whether there is another division to deal with corporate accounts. For the interpretation clause here, does it apply to only personal accounts? And how does it dovetail with the interpretation of terms for corporate accounts in the existing ordinance? Thank you, Ms. Khan, for the question. Now that we propose this amendment, there is no differentiation between personal and corporate accounts. So this part captures both corporate and personal accounts. So, Chairman, in other words, can I take it that by putting forward this amendment, the existing sharing of information of corporate accounts will no longer be based on the banking ordinance, that is, the existing mechanism comprising the Hong Kong MA, police, and banks. And with this amendment, we are now revamping the mechanism to cover corporate and personal accounts in one go. Yes. Right. My next question is this. Prohibited account. I see it means a number of things, and there is also a definition for money laundering as well. That's marked up copy pages 0003 and 0004. So can you tell us how they differ from the existing definition of the money laundering in AMLO? Because I see here that it refers to the proceeds of any or an indictable offense, or any conduct that would constitute an indictable offense if it had occurred in Hong Kong. Now, the emphasis is on occurred in Hong Kong. Another member just now drew the administration's attention to an offense that occurs elsewhere. Now, so for proceeds of an indictable offense or conduct that would constitute an offense if it had occurred in Hong Kong, does it mean that the act must not necessarily happen in Hong Kong as long as the proceeds somehow flow into Hong Kong? This will constitute proceeds under this definition of money laundering. Who will take this question? Ms. Ho from the Department of Justice, please. Thank you, Ms. Khan. Your observation is correct. For a conduct that would constitute an indictable offense if it had occurred in Hong Kong, that actually takes place elsewhere, it will still be captured by this definition of money laundering. Now, there are a number of acts that may constitute indictable offenses, such as fraud or blackmail. Well, I think that the definition of money laundering should be read together with the definition of dealing. Right, so there's another definition for the word dealing, right? Yes. If we could turn to C2415 in the English version of the Blue Bill, you will find the definition of dealing with had regard to the Organized and Serious Crime Ordinance, Cap 455. There is also the same definition here. That means if a local bank deals with the property set out in the definition subject to certain conditions, this bank may apply for information to be published or disclosed. So the offense may have occurred in Hong Kong or in another jurisdiction, as long as the proceeds are dealt with by a local bank, then information may be disclosed under the information disclosure mechanism.
首席助理秘書講下個政策。
Mr. Timothy Wong. Now, we're inserting the definition of money laundering. There's a slight difference between this one and that under Cap 615. There's the criminal intent. The criminal wants to use the crime proceeds to appear as if it were not crime proceeds. But here, in this bill, we are adopting a broader scope. So as long as banks deal with the proceeds, that's within the scope of what you have in this bill. Thank you. So item A under money laundering is very helpful because B covers the definition under Cap 615. Under the limb A, the DOJ has just told us that when you deal with the proceeds, we can already catch that kind of criminal. So the fraud may happen out of town. It may be cyber scam or telecom scam. We can catch those criminals. That's good to see. So let's move on. Division 2. Let's move on to page 5, subdivision 2. And this is safe harbor for sharing of information. Now there are 6 new provisions here. 68AAB all the way to 68AAG. 68AAB. Now, in the circumstances specified, an authorized institution can request information from another AI. There are details on what kinds of information will be covered by the safe harbor provision. Under A, you can see it's information that relates to a relevant entity of institution A, or an entity, account, or transaction associated with entity A. The information can also be on entity B if entity institution B is a relevant entity. Under bracket 2, you will find further details. The circumstances are that institution A becomes aware of certain activities, and institution A thinks those activities constitute enough grounds for an inquiry to assess whether the entity or associated account or transaction may be or may have been involved in or associated with any prohibited conduct. And then under 2B, you can see that institution A knows that institution B has or has reasonable grounds to believe that institution B is likely to have information relating to the entity or associated account or transaction that may assist institution A in its inquiries for detecting or preventing any prohibited conduct. And then under C, institution A has reasonable grounds to believe that seeking the consent referred to would risk prejudicing institution A's inquiries, and this will pose risks. So, Ms. Carmen Khan, questions? Can we backtrack a bit? Can we go back to the definition? I wasn't aware that we're not already at AAB. Now let's come back to the definition. There are some key terms I would like to go over. Now, for any future dispute, a court looking at that case may need a clear sense of the definitions we're adopting. Our legal advisors also asked about the term, and that's occasional transaction. And there's also a term about business dealings or business relationship. Why are we defining occasional transaction and business relationship? And coming back to 68 AAB, and are there differences when it comes to becoming aware of an occasional transaction and when you become aware of other transactions? That's a question for Ms. Celia Ho. Thank you. Now, occasional transaction and business relationship. We're modeling the definition of these two terms on CAP 615, and that's the Anti-Money Laundering Ordinance. We are modeling the definition on Schedule 1 to that ordinance. In paragraphs 5 and 6 of the government's reply to the legal advisor, the government has explained why we are bringing up this term occasional transaction. From what we have found out from the HKMA and the government, banks have business with customers. So just like what CAP 615 does, we have to define business relationship. And we're talking about a continuous form of relationship, or a relationship where both parties expect some sort of continuous relationship. For completeness, the FSTB has instructed us to also cover occasional transactions. So someone comes to the bank saying they want to send money to a recipient. But this person may not have a continuous business relationship with the bank. Paragraph 6 in the reply to the legal advisor's letter says that AIs rarely engage in occasional transactions because of the risks with possible money laundering or other forms of activities. But then for completeness, we're saying under Clause 68 AAB that entities that are involved in or have conducted occasional transactions can ask for information. So no follow-up questions. We come to Mr. Robert Lee. Division 2, Safe Harbor for sharing of information. Request for information from other AIs Can I clarify that by institution A and B, we're talking about hypothetical situations? Now, what if you are talking about a one-to-many situation? So a bank may request information from 5 banks or disclose information to 5 banks. You don't go through the banks one by one. I'm just trying to confirm that this provision also applies to the one-to-many disclosures. Is that right? Yes. 68 AAB mainly addresses the requesting and responding mechanism. For one-to-many information sharing, we will get to that under 68 AAC and AAD. So that's for one-to-many disclosures. Any questions about 68 AAB? Ms. Carmen Khan? Can we get the legal advisor involved? It's a question from the legal advisor and also the reply from the administration. The reply was tabled only this morning. So for 68 AAB1 A2 uppercase B, can I get the government? Can we first get the legal advisor to explain why they asked that question first? So legal advisor. Thank you, Chairman. 68 AAB. My question is about the scope of disclosure. Whether the scope can serve the purpose of preventing and detecting crime. Paragraphs 3 and 4 from the government's reply address that point. I have no further questions myself. If the member has questions, she can ask the administration for further replies. I have a question for the legal advisor. You mentioned the UK legislation. Did you spot differences between our bill and the provisions in the UK law? As Mr. Raymond Chen said earlier, he would go through the differences of our provisions, the differences between our provisions and the law elsewhere. Anything to add from the legal advisor? If not, I will invite the HKMA to tell us more. Mr. Timothy Wong from the FSTB. We have explained that in our reply. So how it works is that Bank A asks for information, and then Bank B responds. The information will help Bank A decide whether action and what action to take. Say a bank may file a suspicious transaction report. The AI can also talk to law enforcement about whether further actions are needed, say freezing or closing a bank account to prevent or detect prohibited conduct. The legal advisor brought up the example of the UK. Under UK law, there are provisions on what should be done about the information received, but we have addressed that point in paragraph 4 of our reply. Ms. Carmen Khan, follow-up questions? So how is the administration responding to the legal advisor's question? So how is paragraph 4 in the reply addressing the question from the legal advisor about the point about UK law, due diligence, etc.? So why are we departing from the UK practice? I'm sorry, we just got the reply. I don't think we can cover everything at the meeting today. So we will have a meeting next week. That will give us more time to digest the papers tabled today, and there will be time for further questions next week. So can we get Mr. Timothy Wong to address that question first? So I will first take the question and I'll see if the HKMA has anything to add in a moment. Now, paragraph 4 in the letter from the legal advisor says this. So in the UK, an institution receives information and then they can take certain actions, such as for the purposes of preventing, detecting, or investigating academic crime, theft, money laundering, or terrorist financing, etc. So as I touched on a moment ago, for us, we are proposing something similar. So in our system, we propose that an institution, upon receiving the information, can assess the situation. And then the institution can decide whether prohibited conduct is involved, and if so, if there is such a risk, our institution here can take further actions, such as filing a suspicious transaction report. Once the STR is filed, the AI can talk to law enforcement. And if there is such a need, further steps can be taken, meaning freezing or closing the bank account, and we are achieving a similar goal, and that is preventing and detecting prohibited conduct. Anything to add from the HKMA, Mr. Raymond Chen?
Let me take this question. The legal advisor asked a number of questions relating to 68 AAB. Timothy referred to the UK Act, which served as reference, and I'm not going to repeat his point. In the public consultation process, information shared should be limited to what is necessary to achieve the purpose, and that's the view we received during the public consultation exercise. Now, we've departed from this viewpoint in the bill because in terms of actual operation, if we make it explicit that information can only be shared on a strictly necessary basis, then it will be quite difficult. So in the bill, we provide the scenarios under which information can be shared. Well, as the requesting bank will be required to share information of the client, then information should be provided. But we have not entailed this concept of only when necessary. And also to answer the legal advisor's other question, in paragraph 5, the legal advisor referred to 68 AAB 1A 2B and 1B 2B, and there is a slight difference in how these two provisions are drafted. Now, the reason we have this difference is that the requesting institution may not have a full picture of the situation. So it is worded this way: may have conducted. And in fact, in our reply, we have elaborated on the point about the difference. Just to respond to the legal advisor's question, and I'm happy to learn that the legal advisor has agreed that we have indeed answered his questions. Right, I think we should pause here. We have another meeting reserved. That's next Tuesday from 10:45 to 12:45. So I believe at the next meeting we should be able to complete the cost-by-cost scrutiny. Thank you for joining us today. There being no other matter, the meeting will be adjourned here. Thank you.